This is Word on the Reef, where marine science meets adventure. Join Tanya Murphy and Brett Goodban as we plunge into the wonders of the Great Barrier Reef and explore the mysteries beneath the waves. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Word on the Reef. My name is Tanya Murphy, and with me is my fellow aquanaut, Brett Goodban.
Good morning, everyone. Show number 4. So excited.
Yes. How are you, Brett?
Yeah, good. It's been a busy week, but yeah, fantastic.
And joining us in the studio today, we have dive instructor, marine social scientist, and CEO of Divers for Climate, Yolanda Waters.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Excited.
Great to have you on our 4th radio show on Cairns FM. Yolanda has been diving since the age of 13 and specialises in researching climate communications and messaging in the reef tourism industry. Now, coming up on the show today, we'll be talking about the current coral bleaching that is actively impacting the reef from Townsville through to Cooktown right now. What causes this coral bleaching? What impact is it having? And what can we do about it? We'll also be talking about a topic which Yolanda studied in her PhD, which is the reef tourism industry. What role does it play in helping protect our reef? What role can divers and snorkelers, like many of you listeners out there might be, what role can you play in protecting the reef? All these topics and more coming up on the show today. Now, for all those listening in live, save this number on your phone now. It is our text line. So if throughout this interview you have questions for us or Yolanda, you can text us on 0437 835 937. And that will be the number for any of our future shows. So save it now, and in any show that comes up in future, if you have any questions, you can send us a text. Don't call us because we're busy talking on the radio, but if you send us a text, we'll try our best to answer it. Now, time for what I'm making a habit of doing at the start of most shows, a quick reef health update of what's currently happening out there. But firstly, birthday update. It is my birthday tomorrow.
Yay, happy birthday. And you're going out with the fishies tomorrow, aren't you?
Yes, I am treating myself to a fun dive out on the reef tomorrow with Yolanda and some other divers. So I'm really excited to go out and see our fish
I'll ring
friends.
Wally and get him to sing you happy birthday when you get out there.
Thank you. So yeah, even though I've spent 13 years working on the reef as a diver, as soon as I get the opportunity to just go there for fun, I'm out there again. So it really goes to show what an amazing place it is. And if there's anyone else out there that hasn't been there for a while, go check it out. But back to the subject of the reef health update. Unfortunately, the reef is now in the midst of another coral bleaching event. If there are any new listeners who want to get a deeper understanding of the science behind what is coral bleaching, what causes it, you can listen to an in-depth explanation on the Word on the Reef podcast. Listen back to Season 1, Episode 2 was when I did a deep dive into explaining the science of coral bleaching. But basically, to sum up, carbon pollution from burning fossil fuels like coal, oil and gas is trapping heat inside our atmosphere, causing climate change, which is heating up our planet. Much of the heat has been absorbed by the oceans, which are now at record high temperatures. The entire planet is currently in the grips of a 2-year-long global coral bleaching event, which has affected corals from the Caribbean to the Pacific to the Indian Ocean, as well as here in Australia. Now, the heat stress causes corals to get sick and turn white and sometimes bright fluorescent colours, which are a bright neon warning that we need to take action. Bleached corals can recover if they get a break, but as oceans continue warming, back-to-back bleaching events are making recovery increasingly difficult. And while this information is quite concerning, we will be talking about some of the solutions and what we can do so we can have a bright future for our reef. So stay with us. But let's take a look at what's happening on the reef at the moment, according to the Marine Park Authority, which released its latest reef health update on Wednesday. And their surveys have revealed widespread bleaching across the northern and far northern regions of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, basically from Townsville all the way up to Cape York. Of the 440 in-water surveys conducted, 74% of reefs surveyed showed some signs of bleaching, although the severity of that bleaching varies across the reefs and the corals. And we don't have enough data from the far northern section yet, but I recently was in touch with the directors of the Lizard Island Research Centre, who informed me that Lizard Island, north of Cooktown, is currently experiencing its 6th back-to-back bleaching in 6 years. So every year for 6 years. They'll be, I guess, on next week's show. So we'll be able to find out more firsthand from them about what they're seeing up there next Friday. But over the past week, sea surface temperatures in the far north reached up to nearly 2 degrees above average. Meanwhile, in the northern section around Cairns and Port Douglas, sea surface temperatures have reached up to 1.2 degrees above average. We've had a little bit more cloud cover around here thanks to some of this rainy weather. We know that some central areas of the reef have also been impacted by flood plumes, like the flooding that they had in Townsville, which, when floodwaters reduce salinity levels on inshore reefs, it can also cause bleaching, and some mortality on shallow water corals at several inshore reefs. Particularly impacted were the Palm and Family Island groups. However, the bleaching we're seeing on outer reefs beyond the reach of flood plumes is a reflection of skyrocketing sea temperatures due to climate change. And meanwhile, we should note that Ningaloo Reef in Western Australia is also experiencing a severe bleaching event after temperatures there in some areas of Ningaloo Reef reached up to 4 degrees above average, which is just...
It's outrageous, isn't it?
Incredible, yes. And it's the first time that widespread bleaching has occurred on both coasts at the same time, and it has scientists extremely concerned and calling out for strong climate action. Now, with that said, we know the reef is huge. Different corals are affected differently by bleaching, depending on their depth, the current local conditions, species of coral. Some are more resilient than others, and so on. So it's important to remember that the reef is still beautiful. There's still lots to see out there, as evidenced by the fact that I am going out tomorrow for a fun dive on my birthday. So I have not lost interest or hope in the reef, and I hope all the listeners out there still understand how beautiful it is and what we still have left to fight for and protect. So that's my reef health update. Let's dive into a bit of a discussion with our guest, Yolanda. Good morning again, Yolanda.
It's great to have you here. Thank you.
No, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so if you've just joined us, Dr. Yolanda Waters is a marine social scientist and CEO of Divers for Climate. Just off the back of hearing some of those latest stats of the bleaching on the reef, Yolanda, what sort of things are you experiencing or hearing from the members of Divers for Climate who are divers all up and down the reef?
Yeah, light question to start. It's tough, right? Because divers are so deeply connected to what's happening, right? I think it's a totally different thing. You can hear about it on the news, you can hear about what's happening with warming ocean temperatures, but if you've been diving these reefs for a long time or even a short while and you've seen those changes and you've seen just what you just described, Tanya, like what the negative changes that are happening, but also the amazing things. Like, it's really hard to explain that feeling to someone who's never been underwater. Yeah. And so divers have this huge connection to what's happening, not just on the Great Barrier Reef, but all around the oceans and coasts around Australia. And when things like this happen, when these mass events happen, or when we're seeing these stresses that we know are from global issues that are quite challenging to tackle, they're quite complicated, the feeling of a lot of divers is there's a little bit of overwhelm, and divers are so passionate about the ocean, they're so deeply connected, and they already are doing a lot in a lot of ways. Like, they're engaged in cleanups, in conservation efforts, in restoration, in citizen science and monitoring. Like, divers are actively engaged people. But when something comes through, like a bleaching event because of warmer ocean temperatures, that's hard, because all you can do at that point in the water is watch. And that's a really uncomfortable feeling, because I remember last year we were down in the southern Great Barrier Reef when it was happening, and everyone was just like, fingers crossed, because that's all you can do, right? Hope that the water cools down, it recovers, and we're safe for another year. And so the feeling a lot of divers, I think, yes, is concern, is sadness, is there's a little bit of uncertainty, but there's also a sense of, what can I actually do here? Like, I'm doing everything I can. It feels like a problem that's so out of our hands as individuals. And so, yeah, it's a mixed bag of feelings, I think.
It is. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, is that we can't ignore that connection that divers have with the reef. And it can be really difficult for us and our colleagues that work out there in the industry to feel, watching this magnificent gift that we've been given start to slowly slip out of our fingers. It's another way of looking at it. And just all the guests that we'll have in here and everything we talk about in the show, you always hear that connection. The divers and the people in this industry have that connection, don't we? And it's something that you experience when you get underwater, and it can be a bit overwhelming when we go through all of this.
Absolutely. It has a big impact. So we'll talk a bit more about some of the research that you've done in a bit about the experiences of divers and tourism workers on the reef. But just as a bit of background for everyone, with the bleaching that we're seeing at the moment, do you find, when you're working as a dive instructor and so on, people asking, like, is this just part of a natural cycle? Like, what we're seeing, is it normal?
Yeah, well, I mean, people have no idea if they have no concept of what a healthy reef looks like, you know, they've got all kinds of questions. And I'm probably like, it's been a few years since I've been actively working as an instructor, so maybe Brett is better to answer some of these questions. But yeah, people have all kinds of natural questions when you have no idea what to expect when you come and see the reef, for example. All you've seen is the news, all you've seen is pictures in National Geographic, or you've watched a documentary. Like, you've constructed this idea of what a healthy reef is in your head. And so naturally, if you go out to a reef and it's fluorescing or it's bleached, it is stunning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last year, the bleaching down south was like, it was sad because we knew what it meant, but it was like glowing, and there was still marine life around. It is a picture. And I had a friend, it was her first time on the reef, and she had the best time ever. She was like, that was out of this world, because it genuinely is. And so it's normal that people have those questions, which is something I guess we'll get to, is the importance of guides and tourism workers and people there to help guide that experience and that story in a way that doesn't, you know, you don't want to depress them, but you also don't want them to leave without that opportunity of motivating them to act, to protect things.
It's a difficult balance.
It is, yeah.
It really is,
It's a tough job.
It is, and you don't feel like, I get a lot of people come into me and they go, oh, the reef, we went out yesterday, it looked incredible, but we're a little bit confused after listening to your coral show about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But it looked so beautiful. It was all these beautiful fluorescent colours, and you stand there and think, I don't want to burst their bubble.
Yeah.
But people want to know the real story.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, for any listeners out there that aren't aware, corals naturally can be quite natural colours like brown, beige, olive. They can also be blue and purple, but they're usually quite earthy colours, whereas when they're stressed in the bleaching response, they can actually glow like really bright fluorescent colours, and it's just beautiful. So I've seen promotions saying, come and see the reef while it's fluorescing, like it's an attraction, which is, you know, it's great to go and enjoy that, but it's a sign that the corals are under severe stress, and they can either recover from that, or if they actually succumb to it, then they won't look that beautiful for long, because a dead coral is one that's overgrown by seaweed and no longer looks colourful. So yeah, it's a really nuanced picture to try and explain to the tourists what's happening out there. Yeah. But let's circle back to a bit of Yolanda's story. So Yolanda, you did your first dive at 13. It's a lot younger than when I first started diving. So tell us about how you became enthralled with the underwater world and your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, I've only just come to terms with sharing the story, because I always felt like a fraud in this space, because I used to hate the ocean. I grew up absolutely terrified. I grew up on the coast, down near Sydney, and hated sand, seaweed, terrified of sharks, big waves. Not a great coastal ocean girly. And my father, he was a dive instructor in his 20s and 30s, did the whole dive instructor life, travelled the world, and he was like, get your head in the water, you'll change your mind. And I was like, that sounds like the worst idea you've ever had.
Yeah.
And I actually don't remember what changed my mind, but I did it. Did my open water course when I was 13, just after primary school, down in Terrigal Beach, and I was so scared. But then I remember the first dive, and I hid behind my instructor, and the first thing I saw was a cuttlefish, like a big cuttlefish.
Nice.
And I was just like, what is that?
Well, you picked the right creature to ask that question. Yeah.
And I just I'd love to say that was from then on my life was changed, but it was kind of like from then on, my relationship started changing with the ocean, and it was still because diving is not the most accessible sport, so every now and again when we'd have a family trip, I'd get to do it. But it really wasn't until I finished my undergraduate degree, didn't know what to do with my life, was like, what are you supposed to do with this piece of paper? Then my family was like, why don't you take a year off and go work on the Great Barrier Reef or something, go do something different, get your dive master. And I was like, yeah, you know what, I will.
Your family is full of such good advice.
I know. I mean, it got me to where I am today, but it was actually moving up here 6 years ago and doing that, living the dream on the Great Barrier Reef, getting to be in the water every day. That really was that big shift in my relationship with the ocean. Like many people, like you guys, I'm sure, like many people up in this region, the Great Barrier Reef changed my life and the way I see things.
And then after working as a dive instructor on the reef for a bit, you decided to go back into research. So how did that come about, and what research did you decide to do?
Yeah, that was COVID's fault. Tourism wasn't a great place to be in that time. And I was stuck overseas. I got locked out of Australia. So in that, I guess in my time as working on the boats, you get a lot of questions. What is happening on the Great Barrier Reef? What's the deal with climate change? And you're just fresh up there doing a dive master. I was like, I don't know. Like I know what you know. I watch the news. Yeah. I know it's not okay, but like the site we're going to is great to me. I've had a great time here. So what do you tell someone?
Yeah.
And I ended up avoiding those questions and just being like, oh, just don't kick the coral, don't throw stuff in the water. And I didn't feel satisfied with my response. I was like, what can I be telling people? And so I'd started kind of reaching out to people. How do you talk about climate change? I'm not a climate scientist. I was like, how do you have that conversation? I found the answers really hard to find. Like people weren't openly having that conversation, or at least not where I was finding them. And so I had started talking to a researcher based down at the University of Queensland, being like, because she was looking into kind of public perceptions of climate change and the reef, like how do you start to navigate those conversations? And during COVID, obviously I had a lot of time online, not much to do. I started talking a bit more and she was like, do you want to do a PhD? And I was like, you know what? I've got nothing else to do. And I honestly kind of fell into it. It was just luck. And the research was, how do you have those conversations? Because I have, there's this narrative that the reef inspires action. I know from my experience and most people that I know, it inspired them. But I noticed there was a gap, right? If you can't have that conversation, does it inspire action for those tourists that are coming on the boat? If you can't even give them an answer. And so my whole thesis question was, does the reef inspire action? And how do we use that moment, the reef, as an idea, as a concept, and as an experience to engage people in what is a really complex discussion about climate change and how we move forward from here?
I was extremely curious when you started doing the research because I also wanted to know all the facts behind those questions. You surveyed hundreds of tourists on boats and also did telephone surveys with average Australians, right?
Yeah, I think overall we did thousands of surveys. I did a lot of one-on-one interviews with people around the country. I interviewed a lot of marine guides, tourism operators, and then I did bother hundreds of guests on boats to see what they thought.
So your research actually conveniently enforced you to go on lots of boat trips to the Great Barrier Reef, right? Name of research.
Yeah, because I'm a social scientist, so I don't study fish, I study people. So I was actually really lucky, get a few tourism operators that were really willing and really accepting of the work that did let me go out there.
From talking to average Australians, how important and valuable is the reef to people that you talk to?
The reef is something that you just can't even explain, right? So there's a long-term social monitoring program done by CSIRO that manages Australians' perceptions towards the reef. So this is before I started, but there's studies that show that Australians who have never even been to the reef, never even been, say it's part of who they are. Because of the idea it is, how it's connected to the Australian identity. It's the Great Barrier Reef. It has this value that we can't even describe yet. And then you put on top of that people who actually have been, and then on top of that people that live and work and play on it. It has this immense social and cultural value. And then if you think about that cultural and ecological history of the reef and the First Nations connections with the reef, connections with the reef are huge and vast and extremely valuable, and I don't think you could even begin to explain them in a short answer. But across all of Australia, the reef means something to people, even if sometimes it does feel out of sight, out of mind in the busyness of day-to-day life. It's there, and there's an opportunity.
So what feedback did you get from tourists visiting the reef when you went on boats and, as you call it, you bothered them about their experiences and also the expectations versus reality of the tourists visiting the reef?
Yeah, well, I thought I was going to be bothering them. I was so scared. I was like, oh no. And I was so scared to do it, but I was actually no, I was pleasantly super surprised, nothing but positive responses. People who didn't really want to have the conversation were just oh, I don't really know, I'm just going to go keep laying in the sun. And you're like, great, that's fine. I'm not going to force you. But the majority of people were yeah, let's have a chat. Purely because usually on these boats there's maybe one marine biologist and they don't always all get a chance to talk to them. So people have questions they want answered, and people were surprisingly open. And the top 3 questions that I got were, 1, what can I do? Number 2, well, what does that mean for the site that we visited today? I don't care about the Great Barrier Reef, it's huge, but what about my experience? They want to be able to connect it to Wally the Maori wrasse, to the turtle that they've seen, to the specific site that they've just, that's now part of their life experience. And then the third one was, what did it look like before? What's before, where are we now, and what's the possible futures? Was kind of the 3 main questions people were asking, but people were overwhelmingly positive. And so what we did was a bit of an experiment. So I was extremely grateful for the tourism operators that worked with me. So we did an experiment where some trips we talked about climate change. So we worked with the marine biologists who made sure climate was part of their presentation, posters on boats, videos, and the other trips, none of it. Or I would do I would survey before the presentation, or so climate wasn't actively in the experience. To compare, because I guess I wanted to know, does having that information make more people more likely to take action? But I guess something that tourism operators want to know is, does it ruin anyone's day? Because at the end of the day, they're a business,
Yes.
and they need to be making people come, tell their friends to come, and then come back, because that's their livelihood, right? So they wanted to know, well, is it going to negatively affect us? Because it feels like it might. And I was like, which is a very valid concern. So we also tested that. And we actually found that it does not ruin anyone's day.
No.
80% of people said they actually wanted more information, and the ones that didn't, they just don't engage. They just ignore you and go about their thing. Like, it's not going to put anyone down. We actually found that people that did get that information said the reef exceeded their expectations. And I think it's because, like we said before, people have no idea what to expect. So having that information, that guide, that curated experience, and I'm sure you get this probably at the aquarium, like having that kind of framework to help people with their experience changes their perceptions of what is normal, what is healthy, what they've just seen, where it's going.
Yeah, well, education's definitely the key, isn't it? We get such a vast array of people every week, from little kids to 80-year-olds. And when I first started there and we started doing the education shows, we could see this pattern where people didn't really want to be spoken to about climate change, and they didn't really know how to talk about it, or they didn't understand it. But now you do a show and you've still got 100 people sitting there waiting for your chat at the end, and then people come up to you and they say, I want to know.
Yeah.
Yep.
Please teach me. Or they'll come up to me and say, thank you so much for just giving us the real story.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? We have this perception that it's drummed into us all the time, that people don't want to know about that stuff. That's not true.
Not at all.
It's just not.
And like of what you just said, people are so disillusioned with media, with politics. They also, scientists aren't known for being the best communicators. For example, like that Ames report that came out a few years ago was like, reef coral cover is the best ever. And then you've got the news that says everything's dead.
Yeah.
And then the average Australian goes, well, what's actually going on? So something else we found that study was a huge level of trust in guides and crew and tourism operators to be like, well, tell me what's actually happening. What's happening on your site? What have you seen? Because at the end of the day, people relate to people and personal experiences. Yeah. And so that was another huge thing. So that's like another, like, speaks to the potential of the industry in activating millions of people.
Yeah. The figures dipped a bit during COVID and then starting to recover, but normally pre-COVID, around 2 million people visit the Great Barrier Reef every year. That's not all divers, but it could be people going to an island, and all of them have the opportunity to learn something that could inspire them to take action, whether they go back to their home country, where it could be a landlocked country where it snows all the time and is nowhere near a coral reef, but they can still take actions to reduce their carbon footprint or their impact. They can change their civic actions wherever people go in the world. So the power of the tourism industry to change people's lives is, I feel like there's nothing else like it, because the people I talk to on the boats, the tourists say, like, I don't really trust the media because different media outlets say different things depending what their agenda is. Even though science is the best source of information, some people don't really trust it. So they're most likely to trust the things that they see with their own eyes when they go snorkeling on the reef, because that's their personal experience. But if they don't have a good guide to explain what they're seeing with their own eyes, most tourists wouldn't have the baseline knowledge to understand what they're seeing when they snorkel. So I know I went snorkeling in Thailand on a reef which I could tell was completely decimated. There was like 2 corals in 100 square meters, but there was fish everywhere. So all these tourists, it was their first time snorkeling, they were like just mind blown. They were like, wow, this is amazing. I saw a parrotfish. So for them, the baseline, the bar is extremely low for them to have an amazing holiday, which is good, and one of the reasons why snorkeling is always going to be an amazing tourist experience, and everyone should continue to do it regardless of the changes. But on the other hand, you have people who have watched Finding Nemo and think that all corals should be bright rainbow colours. And so they'll dive on a perfectly healthy coral area, but they'll see some corals which are naturally brown, and they'll be like, oh, I'm disappointed. I thought all the corals were going to be bright pink and purple. So as a tourist, they really don't understand how to interpret what they're seeing necessarily unless they have good interpretation from their guides.
Do you know one of the real positives also is that in one of the shows that we do at the aquarium, the Deep Reef show, that's the opportunity where we get to explain to them what coral is. And I always start off the little chat, I look at it, 100 people, and they're all looking at you engaged in what you're about to say, and you say to them, what I want to do now is I want to spend 2 minutes teaching you what coral is, what it is, and once you understand what it is, you understand how it's being affected.
Yeah.
And I say to them, is that okay? I'm going to say it anyway. And they just look up at you and go, yes, yes, please. And they're from little ones to old ones. And after 2 minutes, they just look at you and go, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I had no idea. But now I understand what is causing that problem. You can't understand how coral bleach works if you don't understand what a coral is.
Yeah, exactly.
People want to know.
Which is a whole subject in itself, coral biology. And I did talk about it on the podcast back in season 1, episode 2. So for all those out there who want to dive back into what coral is and what it means when it bleaches, just look for Word on the Reef on your favourite podcast app like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those who have just joined the show, our guest today is marine social scientist and CEO of Divers for Climate, Dr. Yolanda Waters. And we've been talking about the tourism industry and how important it can be in changing people's lives and inspiring them to take action to help protect the reef, particularly on the biggest threat to the reef, which is climate change. We've just discussed how important and valuable the tourism experience can be for inspiring action. But some tourists have a bit of concern about whether tourists visiting might actually be a threat or add to the pressure on the reef. Yolanda, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, there's definitely a misconception within the Australian public, like of the disproportionate impact that tourism itself has. And then, you know, some of the surveys that I've done, people do put it up there in some of the top threats, which we know from the Marine Park Authority and all those Outlook reports. It's a very, very minimal threat. What is the number? I think tourism is concentrated in like less than 1% or so. If something even less, something tiny to the reef.
Yeah.
And like I will say, like tourism on the Great Barrier Reef here in Australia is done exceptionally well compared to many other tropical coral reef tourism areas in the world. And I think a lot of the stuff we do so well, but it's because, you know, psychologically, the way people think about environmental impacts is it's much easier for them to connect what they can see physically in the environment. So if you see 300 snorkelers out in the reef, you see boats going out, you go, well, that can't be good. Whereas thinking of something bigger like climate change, unless you're under there watching bleaching, even then, it's really hard to connect the dots. Whereas tourism, people connect those dots mentally much easier. So they go, oh, well, 100 people out there, that can't be good for the environment. And so it's just like a psychological shortcut that people make. And so it's actually not true at all. It's obviously not got no impact, right? But tourism does its best to have as minimal impact as it can. And that's kind of one of the concerns of the industry in speaking out about something like climate change. They are concerned that people will come back and call them hypocrites, right? And say, oh, well, you're going out in the reef, you know, maybe ever think maybe you're the problem. And it's quite a difficult conversation to have. Yeah. I don't know what you've heard.
And I guess you can balance that with education as well. So you touched at the start. We have an issue of out of sight, out of mind, right? And we often get questions from certain customers that'll come through, and we'll chat to anyone about anything, and they'll say to you at the end, they'll go, look, I really love this journey, but do we really need facilities like this? Do we really need to be taking boats out to the reef? Do we need to be having aquariums? And my answer to that is, well, 70% of the most important ecosystem on our planet is hidden. If we don't bring it to you and we don't bring it up and we don't educate you on it, then you can't change the way you feel about it. And I think that the education that people can get from that, the experience they can get from that, and if we only change 60% of people's opinions over a year that go out there or come into us and get the answers or vice versa, we need that. We need the people to go out there, jump off the boat, meet Wally, look at the coral, get taught about it, and then leave going, that was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. Because if we don't do that, how are they going to know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all three of us in this room right now and pretty much every other marine conservationist that I've connected with started their journey with a simple visit to the reef as a tourist. That was me and probably you guys as well. So those who are advocating to protect the reef the most, it's because they've had a connection with it. And like you said, Australia is doing particularly well. I've been talking with my friend Max from the Caribbean, and he was describing some areas of the world where there's overfishing and overhandling of the marine life in much higher numbers than what we have on the Great Barrier Reef, whereas it's quite well managed here. And less than 7% of the Great Barrier Reef is open to tourism vessels, but it, like Yolanda said, it works out to be less than 1% when you actually look at which parts of those reefs people are actually snorkeling on. And for me, having worked on the reef, I've seen that because we are so protective and so passionate about protecting our sites, as dive guides, we're teaching the tourists we will not let them touch the coral, we will not let them set foot on it. Yeah. If you visit the reef, you'll hear, if anyone does step on the coral, you'll hear the staff going absolutely ballistic, blowing the whistle and shouting, get off the coral.
You're spending the day on the boat now.
You've had your water rights revoked. Right. But yeah, it can be very upsetting. Like you said, if you see a tourist kicking a coral, that can be very upsetting. But in the grand scheme of things, the impact of coral bleaching, which, for example, last year it was the worst coral bleaching on record on the Great Barrier Reef, 75% of the reef was bleached, which is obviously much bigger than the area visited by tourists. So it's definitely the biggest threat. So how comfortable are, you talk to a lot of tourism staff, Yolanda. How comfortable are they? How equipped are they feeling to educate tourists about the climate impacts on the reef? And how equipped are they feeling to teach people what actions they can take?
Yeah. Well, obviously I can't speak for them, but I can speak to some of the stories that were shared with me. I will just start by saying guides and interpreters on the reef and instructors and extends to aquarium staff are some of the best educators I've ever met.
They all deserve a pay rise, right?
Sure.
I'm not doing it currently, but all my friends out there, they are doing an amazing job. Yes, pay rise.
But even just knowing when to read a room, in interviewing a lot of guides, I was like, how do you feel talking about climate change? It depends on the boat on the day. I can read a room and know if people are keen, if people are not, if it's the right day for it. It could be a horrible, super windy, rainy day, but if the crowd is right, it might be perfect, or the opposite. Know how to read their audience, and that's comms 101, know your audience.
Yep.
And then know how you sit as a messenger, and they know they're kind of trusted, they know their site, and then what do you say? And so I think guides are just, because you have to be, you get confronted with 100 strangers a day, you become a very good communicator, and you have to give good customer service at the same time, make sure they don't drown. You just become the ultimate communicator about what is going on out on the reef. And there's a lot that do feel confident now, and more so with programs like the Master Reef Guides, and there's a range of kind of education programs to help guides kind of give more information about ecology, about biology, about some of the threats that are happening, particularly local threats. But then I guess when it comes to climate change, that's just a whole nother bucket, right? Climate change is complex to talk about for anyone, even if you are in the climate space, because the solutions are not clear. And I think if the solution is not clear, it means how do you get into a conversation about the problem, right? Plastic, solution's also not clear, but clearer, right? You see plastic on the reef, we pick it up. We do a lot of dives against debris, you clean it up. If it's restoration, you can see things that are happening. Whereas climate change, it's so hard to get into. And I think because it's become super politicized, people are scared, I don't want to get into a political debate. I'm at work, everyone's on a holiday, no thanks.
Yep.
They think they have to be an expert. I can't have a conversation about climate change. I don't know all the stats and the facts. I'm not a climate scientist, which is ridiculous because if you shouldn't have to be a climate scientist to talk about something you care about, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And then just general kind of just not feeling confident to get into the nitty gritty. And there are some guides that do it, and I've watched some guides actually get right into the IPC, the projections of what a warming planet looks like, which is fantastic. But not everyone feels like they're able to do that, because they're not sure what the response will be like from the public. And so a lot of kind of the feedback that I got was that, I can address the threat. Climate change is the greatest threat. Every pretty much guide does that. And what they prefer to do is then guide it to local solutions and how we build local resilience. And like to tell people of the work we're doing here in the region, talk about the Crown of Thorns, talk about the Coral Nurture Program or the restoration work that's going on, talk about the monitoring we're doing, the citizen science, or the some of the programs that tourism operators are now engaged in with the Marine Park Authority. They bring it back down to local, which is really great, and I think it's really good. But I think there is this little gap there where how do you bring that back to what people can take home for climate change and bring it back to that global discussion?
Something that's going to relate to them
when they leave.
Yeah, it's we've also got to focus on some of the positives that we're doing as well, and that takes a lot of that overwhelming feeling away from people. And you see people start to calm when you talk to them and say, look, if you're going out to the reef, you use reef safe sunscreen, don't touch the animals, and if you're snorkeling, you're 3 feet longer than you've ever been in your life, so please don't snorkel near the coral, you're going to kick it. And then while you're in Cairns, don't buy a single-use plastic water bottle. Get a reusable one. Try and limit the amount of plastic you do. And when you leave Cairns, you have a big smile on your face, you've helped the environment, and you've had a great holiday, and people start to feel a bit more calmer because they get that overwhelming feeling that we've gone too far, we can't fix it. That's not true.
Well, yeah, and I definitely think this is the tricky bit, right? Like, yes, a lot of guides and people that work out there do feel comfortable giving calls to action like that, like kind of small little steps, lifestyle things you can do at home. But what we actually found was that a lot of people generally know those are good things to do for sustainability, and they either do or don't do them. But a lot of people also don't believe that those things have an impact. And so that's kind of, there's three things that are missing in a lot of communication, not just about the reef, but about climate change generally, is not just what can I do, but how can I do it and how will that actually make a difference? And a lot of them can't make that last step. Like, they've been told to recycle a million times. Like, I've been recycling my whole life. Climate's still warming up.
Yep.
What else do I do now? And so they're waiting for that next thing. And then what that next thing is really hard because it depends on the context that you're in. Like, obviously, next thing would be great if everyone could be activated to go speak to their leaders, right? But that's not an appropriate call to action if you're on a tourist boat out on the reef. So what's that next step you can give people to take back and think about bigger, changing the system, changing the policies that kind of guide what we're doing to the climate at the moment?
Our guest today is marine social scientist and CEO of Divers for Climate, Dr. Yolanda Waters, and we've been talking a lot about the role of tourism on the Great Barrier Reef in inspiring people to take action to protect it, especially on climate impacts. And we've discussed how a lot of people are already doing, recycling and are quite aware of lifestyle actions they can take at home, whether they do them or not. Most people are aware of those things. But Yolanda, what does individual action look like when it comes to climate change? I mean, it's a global issue. It's caused by carbon dioxide gases in the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels. What can I, as an individual, actually do about that?
This is my favourite question. Well, because I think the way individual action on climate change has been framed until now is just things you can do. You must reduce your energies. You must switch to this. You must stop eating meat. You must do this, which is not very empowering. It just feels like a lot of weight and responsibility gets pushed on the individual for a problem that we know has been caused by a lot of factors beyond us. Of course, we're not blameless. We're part of the system, but it's very uncomfortable to have all that put on you as an individual person, because there's only so much you can do, right? And especially now with the cost of living, like, people are just trying to get through the day as it is. So to have that individual frame can be really tricky. And so what a lot of the climate space and the climate movement talks about is like, no, it's not about the individual, it's about the system, right? How we change the social and political and cultural system that we live in. How do we shift politics? How do we shift media narratives? How do we shift that needle so that when we talk about things like accelerating the transition to renewable energy, it's not so scary. Like, it's just part of what we do. And so they talk about systems change and advocating for systems change, which is great and is what's needed. But then what that does is make the individual, just you or me, feel kind of like, oh, well, I'll do my thing, the system does its thing over there. And something that we found in the research, interviewing people, we did a bit of like what we call a mental model exercise, a bit of a post-it mind map exercise to see how people see the Great Barrier Reef, the threats, the solutions, and where they see themselves and the actions they can take, and they saw it as completely separate. People don't see themselves as active agents of change. They don't see themselves in changing the system. And so then you get this narrative that's like individual or systems, which is really frustrating because systems aren't abstract. Systems are made of individuals, right? They're made of people like you or I. They're made of people who make decisions, who take actions. Politicians, they're individuals. CEOs of huge companies, individuals. Every person that works in a climate space got there because they were passionate and they decided to do something as an individual. And obviously, there's certain levels of privilege that, that help decide whether you can do something like volunteer or not. But so I'm on this mission to reframe when people say individual action, what does that mean? And yes, it can mean things you do at home. Like, there's like some really impactful things you can do to decarbonize your home and your lifestyle personally. And if that's something you're keen on doing, amazing. But individual action also means things like social action. How do you engage in groups? How do you talk to other people? So educators, right? How do you, those hundreds and thousands of conversations you have every day, that's you as an individual.
Well, one individual can reach. How many people have visited the Cairns Aquarium and heard your talk?
Just over 2.3 million since we've opened.
See, that's individual. Yeah. That's one person, and people underestimate the power of talking to people, right? One of the number one reasons people don't talk about climate change is because they think the person next to them doesn't want to talk about it either, or doesn't want to hear about it, or is not interested, which is just not true. Like, maybe they're busy, sure, but it's not like we haven't quite normalized the conversation yet. So those social things that you can do, whether you share things on social media, if you host events, if you
Run a podcast.
Run a podcast, exactly.
Or a radio show.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
That is a climate action, like social actions. And then you've got organizational actions, things you can shift in your workplace, right? Are there any workplace policies that you could be, this could be done better, as small as it might be? And then you've got what we call civic actions. We have a federal election coming up, but like how we engage, not just now, but beyond the election, right? How do you engage with decision makers? Like, we're lucky enough that we live in a democratic country. And so people often don't realize that we're allowed to engage in that. And it doesn't have to be scary. You don't have to be an activist or a lobbyist.
Yeah, anyone can actually meet with their local member of parliament.
Yeah.
And if they got voted in for a reason, they're probably a really friendly, approachable person. That's kind of their job.
Yeah.
Honestly, most of them are, and they're really happy to sit down and have a chat. They're just people too, right? And I think even if not going that far to talk to representatives, just being able to write letters, write op-eds in papers, like individual action can be so many things. And I think people have this idea that, if I'm going to be engaged in climate action, I have to do everything, I have to be perfect, I have to do all the things. But in reality, if everyone just did a few that really fit in their lifestyle, in their needs, in their context, because not everyone can volunteer, for example. They've got full-time jobs, they've got kids, they've got things. But maybe in that way there's something for them, there's something for everyone. I think expanding that idea of what individual action looks like for people, I think that is kind of where we need to be going, because there's enough people are concerned and aware at the moment. They're just not sure what to do.
Yep. We know that more than 80% of Australians, according to surveys, care about climate change and want to see more action on it and would like to see the government taking more action on it, but they're just not quite sure what to do. And that's what Yolanda's helping us to understand, is how powerful actions can be. And I think everyone understands, recycling one piece of plastic or picking up one piece of plastic off the beach isn't going to save the ocean. But if there are thousands of people picking up thousands of pieces of plastic off the beach, it will. And that's what motivates people. But people need to understand that extends to your vote or signing a petition. You might think it's just one vote, it's not going to change things. But if you join a group full of thousands of people who are doing those same things, then that's how pretty much every environmental or social progress has happened throughout history to where we are today. I'm very aware that we have very little time left.
Gee, that hour went quick.
we could definitely talk a lot longer on these topics, so we'll definitely have to get Yolanda back at some point.
Absolutely.
And we didn't even go very deep yet into your organisation, Divers for Climate, but we can get an update
Follow
on that.
us.
Yes, follow Divers for Climate on social media. Do you want to, explain to people in
how many
speed
seconds do I have?
speed dating style?
It's a combination of everything we've been talking about, right? We know there's a dive community that's keen and engaged to activate on climate action. They're just not sure what to do. And so Divers for Climate was trying to be that pathway, right? We're trying to connect divers and then the dive industry with decision makers and kind of make sure our concerns and needs are reflected in climate policy and solutions. So we're kind of a bridge and a platform to have those conversations. Follow us and you'll find out more.
Absolutely, everyone. Follow Divers for Climate. Thanks for joining us on Word on the Reef, Yolanda Waters. It's been amazing to have you.
Yeah,
it's just been brilliant.
Can't believe how quick an hour goes.
I know, I told you, didn't I?
Yeah.
Once we start talking, time evaporates. Yep.
Yes, it's an abstract concept time here on Word on the Reef. Underwater, the time just goes differently.
Yeah, and before you wrap that up, happy birthday for tomorrow.
Yeah, happy birthday. Everyone text Tanya happy birthday.
Yeah, absolutely. And enjoy your dive tomorrow, buddy.
Thank you. And everyone, don't forget, if you came in late and you want to listen back on this or any of our other episodes, you can do so. Just look for Word on the Reef on your favourite podcast app like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever. See you next time.
See you guys.